to remind everyone that Black Lives Matter. And thank you for observing social distancing and holding a peaceful demonstration today. And we're here to say we'll act against racism wherever and whenever we see it, even when we notice it in ourselves. Newark is a town which remembers its history, a town which is used to looking backwards as well as forwards. When David asked me to join him today, he asked me about the history of Newark, and I told him about William Gladstone. I'd heard recently that William's father was a slave owner, but in 1850, when William was 40 years old, he described slavery as by far the foulest crime that taints the history of mankind in any Christian or pagan country. So you'll see from what I read about below that actually he was somebody who changed his mind. And it's possible for all of us to learn and grow. Like David's already said, he didn't call himself anti-racist until recently. I've called myself anti-racist for a while longer than that, but again it was something that I had to learn about and I had to find out more about, and there's nothing wrong with that. So in my short speech today, I can't tell you everything about William Gladstone because he lived a long life. And if you want to know more, you can Google about him or go on the internet or go on Wikipedia, or you can ask at the library if there's any books about him. So Gladstone was a politician in Victorian times, and he became the only British Prime Minister to serve 4 separate terms in office. So he was quite a famous politician in his lifetime. And when Gladstone was only 22 years old, he won his seat in Newark in the 1832 general election. And because there wasn't universal suffrage at that time, women couldn't vote, working class people couldn't vote, he won with only 887 votes. And his maiden speech in the House of Commons was in defence of the rights of West Indian sugar plantation magnates, slave owners. So that's the first time he ever spoke in the House of Commons. He spoke in defence of slave owners because his father was a slave owner. And he was immediately criticised at that time by people who were anti-slavery, because that's about the time, that was a year or two before, slavery was made illegal by the British government. So he was a white, privileged son of a slave owner, and he voted for compensation for his slave owners. And the compensation was massive. So he basically went into Parliament to vote for a big payout for his dad. Because the more slaves you owned, the more compensation you were given. And you know what? If you were a slave, you didn't get anything apart from your freedom. So at the end of his life, Gladstone said that the abolition of slavery was one of the great political issues in which the masses had been right and the upper classes had been wrong. So again, he did begin to acknowledge that because he did change his views. But he did change his views, but I don't think he gave back any of the money that he inherited from his dad. And I don't think he called for the compensation of slaves. Because due to racism, slaves weren't compensated, and due to classism as well. So I've got some information. So I began to wonder, why was Gladstone House named after him in 2018? And that was one of the reasons why we decided to start the march today from Gladstone House. Why was William Gladstone's school renamed for him 8 years ago? Why choose a man who acted like that? Why didn't the committees or councils that chose him take a look at the history and decide that it was no longer appropriate to name places after him? In 2020, Gladstone's great-grandson said he doesn't object to the statue of him at his home being removed. And also in 2020, Liverpool University has agreed to a demand from students and others to rename their Gladstone House at Liverpool University. And I can tell you today that on Tuesday, the 21st of July 2020, the school in Newark is going to drop that name and it's going to have a new name.
Yay!
And that's nothing to do with me. But that apparently that school, which is a Church of England school, has been planning that for 8 months. because they re-looked at the history of that man and they decided it was not acceptable to celebrate a man who had acted to compensate slave owners. So I'm hoping that when it's safe to have meetings again, that maybe David and I can go and have a meeting with the people who live at Gladstone House. There's nearly 60 people live there, and they didn't choose that name. One of the councils would have chosen that name. And I was very, very heartened to see that the staff who worked there came out today to wave us on and celebrate us, and they were really, really pleased that we were doing this today, and if they hadn't been on shift they would be with us too. So I think it's amazing and great how much support we've got for this today. So I don't know whether Newark should be proud or ashamed that Gladstone was once MP for Newark, but that's history and we can't change history, but we can learn more and understand more and work together for the future. We can work together against racism because Black Lives Matter. Woo.